in the end of July. So the end of July, July 31st of 2013, I moved here. So it'll be 10 years, a full decade of my life. And I think I just moved here initially just for the professional opportunities that I could have. Before coming to New York, I used to work for the government. My ambition was to be a foreign service officer and work at the embassies of the United States around the world. That obviously didn't work out. I didn't really love the government, which was probably a good idea for me. And then I moved into the private sector where I have worked the last 10 years. And that's kind of the reason I've stayed in New York, specifically working in luxury, both in luxury concierge and operations. And then now, 10 years later, I work for a luxury PR agency where we do public relations for luxury watch brands from Switzerland here in the US. So that's my current day to day. In terms of, I guess, what a typical day looks like, um, there's for me, I live in Manhattan, which is kind of the main area of New York City. Is also where most of people's jobs are located, so that's a great advantage for me because I can walk, I can take a bike, I can take a train. I have a lot of options in terms of transportation, but I actually prefer to take a scooter. So I have an electric scooter and I'm up and down the city in the electric scooter. I used to have a bike, but then I was getting really like hot and sweaty when I would get to work. And I was like, this is not working because then I would have to have like a different change of clothes at work. So I decided to get an electric scooter, and that made it very easy to get around, especially in New York City after COVID hit us. Um, I just wasn't comfortable kind of taking the subway. There's so many people here. When you think it's busy, New York is like a different level of busy. So that kind of gave me the opportunity to be able to just kind of be on my own schedule and my own space. But yeah, I have been married since last year. So obviously that happened in the last 10 years. I met my husband. Yeah, I met my husband here in New York in 2016. He is a DJ. So he works nights and is in the like hospitality industry. Um, so very different opposite lives that we lead. But we kind of met through a friend of a friend, and we've been married since last year. I've also had got a Pomeranian. So I'm now in my 30s. So I feel like,
Sorry to interrupt. For those who don't know, it's a dog.
yes, it's a dog. I can show Kobe. His name is Kobe. He's around here somewhere, running around. I see him. Here, Cobes. This is my Pomeranian right here, Kobe. He's a little Kobe. Say hi, bud. Oh, thank you. Thank you. He's if you hear anything in the back, it's him running back and forth in the apartment.
All right.
So he's a yeah. And yeah, I think from when I'm not working, which seems to be a lot, especially when you're in a big city here. I'm mostly just a very I enjoy time with myself. I take myself out to like yoga or Pilates classes, which I really enjoy. I spend a lot of time with my dog and like taking him out either to Central Park or like hiking or just keeping him engaged and socialized. So we do a lot of activities where he can come. There's actually really nice classes here in New York where you can take your own dog to yoga or Pilates. So like people bring their dogs and work out, which is really nice. Um, and other than that, I think it's, pretty typical. I'm in my 30s now, so a little less partying. I enjoy just like dinner and drinks, some wine with my friends, and I love being in bed by like midnight at the very latest. So yeah.
Quiet.
Yeah. It's a quiet lifestyle. So yeah, that's a little bit about me, I guess, in New York specifically.
Mara, what about, I was thinking about, yes, you coming into your 30s, which is different than being in our 20s, definitely different. Do you find yourself finding other parts of New York that you didn't explore when you were in your 20s because your habits changed or your interests changed?
Yeah, I definitely think that I've gravitated towards a lot more like when you're not going to bars anymore, like what else do I do? And there's so much, but I think in my 20s, I was like, let's go to the bar, let's find a boyfriend. Like, and I already have all those things. So that's not kind of the focus. But I've definitely explored a lot more restaurants than I used to, especially like I didn't make as much money in my 20s, and now in my 30s I can treat myself to a very nice restaurant. New York has wonderful cuisines from all over, so I've definitely kind of been able to have the privilege to be able to do that and try a lot of different things, whereas in my 20s I was just like, okay, we got to pay the bills. We can only go out once or twice,
Yeah,
just because it is very expensive to live here. And then, I've come to a point in my life where I can give myself a little space, a little relaxation to indulge. And I think anything that's like hands-on, I didn't used to do. So like I find myself like towards like looking at like pottery classes or even just like group classes. It's like I feel like a mom a lot. Just I want to do like crafts. I want to like build something, take care of plants. Like those are all things I feel like I wouldn't have done in my 20s that I
yeah.
kind of now enjoy.
I
Yeah.
think the other thing I wanted to ask her, you're not originally from New York, am I right?
No, I'm not. I was born and raised in Chicago, Illinois, which is I think people who know, I don't know what people know, Chicago Bulls, Michael Jordan. That's kind of what people know. I don't know what else but it's in the middle of the country. So I was not on any coast, which is it's a great city. It's actually, I think, if I'm not mistaken, the fourth or fifth largest city in the United States.
Big,
And yeah, and it has the third largest Latino population in the United States.
which is
So
your heritage, isn't it?
yes, it is my heritage. I'm Mexican by obviously heritage. My parents are born in Mexico and came here when they were 23 years old in the early 80s, in the 80s. Yeah. So
Okay.
they've always settled in Chicago, so I never knew anything different. So because I grew up my whole life there, I went to university also in Chicago. As soon as I graduated, I knew I wanted out. So
Yeah.
I've been gone since then.
Is there, and one of the guys was asking how old you were.
I am 33.
Okay. Oh, right, I'm much older than you. 2 years. I'm
Yeah,
35
you
now.
are older than me.
I was going to say about Chicago and the fact that you live in a big city, you left a big city and you went to an even bigger city. What do you miss about Chicago, if anything at all?
That's hard to say because I have the world in New York, you have the world. I mean, I think the easy answer is to say I miss my family. Sure.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
see them enough. It's fine. I think now that I've gotten older, what I miss about Chicago is the space. Um, I don't have a backyard here. I have parks that I can go to, but so can 5 million other people that live here. So it's not always very open for me. Um, I definitely live in a smaller space. I live in a small studio apartment here in the city. You get used to kind of living small because I'm never home. I'm always kind of moving. But I think in Chicago, when I think back of growing up, I always had like a lot of space, even my room, and we didn't grow up with a lot of money, but even then I had a lot more space than what I have now that I have a lot more money, but I'm living in a little box. But I think for me, the exchange is I prefer that, to be honest, in New York because I get to have less material possessions. I can't have as many shoes, I can't have as many clothes, but I can have a lot of experiences because I'm in New York City. I can do anything. Like there's so many things you can do. There's so many groups that I would not have been able to do in Chicago. But I don't know how to drive. I don't know how to swim. So I feel like I always have to be in a big city where trains and other means of transportation. Otherwise, I think at this point to learn to drive, it costs a lot of money. I would have to pay for a teacher and they're very expensive. I think I'd spend a couple $1,000s like to get a
Really?
license at this point. Yeah, it's crazy.
I didn't know it was so expensive to get a license in the States. I guess it's in the whole country that is expensive or only New York?
Well, it's because I would have to take classes specifically since like typically when you are a teenager, you do the permit and then you get a license and that's not so expensive. But because I'm not like old, but like I passed that time, I have to recertify myself. And that now only happens like with private courses and private teachers, which here in New York City are, of course, even more expensive. So I'd be looking at least a couple $1,000s to kind of learn to drive, especially because I don't have a car here. So then I'm renting or someone's lending me a car. It's the instructor and their time. So
Wow.
yeah. So so that's why I stay in a big city because I don't know how to drive. I don't know how to swim. I barely know how to bike, so that's fine.
Would you want to learn how to drive? Is that something on your bucket list or in your wish list?
It was on my wish list before COVID because when COVID hit, I was going to turn 30. So the goal was like before 30, I'm going to learn to drive. And then, of course, COVID happened here. But now I'm looking at before 40 is like the next milestone. So before 40, I think my priority first is to learn to swim over driving, just because in New York, I don't really have the need to drive. So the goal is by 35, I learn to swim. By 40, I learn to drive, or
Oh,
if
wow.
not sooner. But
Those are
we'll see.
big
Yeah,
goals.
yeah. Well, I forget that Manhattan, where I live in New York, is an island. It's actually an island. So sometimes I think if something were to ever happen here, how do I get off of the island? I gotta swim, so I gotta learn how to swim.
Yeah, that makes sense. That makes a lot of sense. You have to swim. Well, and also
Yeah,
you have the opportunity to go to a nearby beach, if you call it a beach. It is a beach. It is a beach. And I guess it would be nice to swim in the ocean, so it makes sense. Makes sense. What about,
yeah.
I asked you about Chicago, and I also wanted to ask you about your Mexican culture. If you still do things in your everyday life or maybe at the weekends that bring you closer to Mexico or Mexican culture?
So funny enough, my current role in PR, there's one of the accounts that I manage for a brand called Zenith Watches, where I specifically am in charge for the PR in Latin America. So and that just started in January. I've been with the company since July, so it's a new account or a new business that we got. So in a way, I've started to get closer to my Spanish speaking skills a lot more because, of course, I speak Spanish from growing up, but now I have to use it in the workplace, which for me, business Spanish was not a Spanish that I knew very
Yeah,
easily.
yeah.
Um, Other than reloj, I couldn't tell you what everything else was called. So I had to learn like manecilla, like all these words. And I'm like, okay, like I never learned that. So that's definitely brought me closer. And specifically, I work with journalists in Mexico and in Brazil primarily, but we do have some in Argentina, Peru, and Colombia. But those are our primary markets, Mexico and Brazil. So now that I've gotten to work with a lot of journalists in Mexico, it has kind of made me very proud to see the developing country that my parents left from, that it is being prioritized by a luxury like product like Zenith watches, that they want to have presence in Mexico, that there's people in Mexico that are affluent and buying, that it looks very different than what I remember, of course, visiting Mexico when I was a child. It's a much simpler lifestyle, definitely more poverty stricken. And so I think sometimes I get stuck that that was a place that we left from and that, but there's professionals there, it's it. it's definitely changed in the years. And just because my parents didn't have that opportunity, there's hundreds and millions of other people, and different people had varying scales of opportunity. So it's been really nice to interact with professionals that are my color, that look like me, that sound like me, because I hadn't really been able to do that in my professional career. Unfortunately, people like interacting with like Sophia, like that's great. And we remember each other really well. We have because like there really wasn't that many Latinas or Latinos in general. So when we find each other, we kind of like help each other out. So that's why I'm really happy to be here. And like if she calls again, like I would just show up because that's just what we do. But yeah.
Same, same, same. I was going to say that, in that respect, in our classes, we talk about culture a lot and different ways of living, not only with these guys, but with other guys as well, other groups. And so I guess you being from a Mexican American heritage, are there parts of being American that you don't like?
Yeah, a lot. I don't like the I don't like the fact that even now and that there's still I still don't feel American enough sometimes when I leave, right? To those from the outside, like the vision of what an American looks and sounds like still looks very white, very
Blonde.
cookie cutter, which is like the same blonde. And when literally all my friends around me, like I not that I don't have white friends, I do, but like I have every color, and I think you know, it's sad that that's still kind of what people see. So whenever I go out, it's always they're like, oh, they look at me because they register my face, my features, right, are different. But I was born here, like I went to the same schools, like I speak the same things. Um, so it feels a little still different, and it's sad that sometimes in my own country I can still be made to feel other. So or outside or just different because I am petite, I'm Latina, and like I look a little different than that. So and then unfortunately, I'm sure you guys have seen in the news, there's just a lot of things that I personally don't agree with in terms of it just seems like our government is just I don't know, it's a zoo, I think. It's a bunch of clowns
I think
running
we can
something and
have problems in government.
yeah.
We can
So
understand complicated politics. I think we can.
yeah, so that's something I don't like about being American because I think you have to be ready to explain where you stand, which I'm happy to, and I feel like I'm very liberal and open-minded, but there's a lot of things I'm not proud of that we're doing, that laws and rights that we're taking away from people um, that I don't agree with, and that I know, unfortunately, I'm very lucky to live in a big city, and New York is such a big haven. Like it almost puts you in a bubble. But I know that if I were to travel to another place in the United States, it could potentially not be safe for me, and it could potentially not be safe for people that I care for. So that's definitely something that I'm not proud of. That like we should be able to travel our country and be protected everywhere.
Have you been traveling around the US or traveling at all lately? Just curious.
Not so much. Mostly just like Miami and Los Angeles for work. I yeah, a lot of it, I think, after COVID, a lot of the businesses got used to doing stuff
Yeah,
remotely. So I feel like there's less and less of a reason to travel, but when I have done it, it's just been locally, just to Miami, a couple of weddings that I've had, Las Vegas, and then of course Chicago. So I kind of tend to stay in that area.
cool. Now, I asked you about the negative part of being American, but obviously I want to ask you about what you like about being American. Let's be positive.
What do I like about being American? I don't I don't know that I've ever thought like that specifically about being American. I think I enjoy the fact that I like the fact that I'm in a position of privilege, and I obviously accept that, right? But I've had opportunities, doors open that I perhaps would not have had back home because of my family's financial, standing if they had stayed in Mexico. So I am grateful that there is a lot of things that were made available to me because I'm American, just because I'm born here, I can have scholarships and things like that to go to university. And um, as long as I work, you know, at them or find options, like there's always something here. Um, you just kind of have to find it, I think I'm grateful for those opportunities. So I guess that's what I like about being it. But it's hard because when you ask me, like, what do you like about being American? Like, I think that question is a little too um simple because I don't really see myself as just American. Like when you speak to somebody who is Latino or Asian, we always say, I'm Mexican American, I'm Filipino American. It's always where you were from before. So to just say American, like it to me, I feel like that's a one half of me missing. That's
Totally.
only one part, and the other part is Mexican. So uh, every time anyone asks me, it's like, I think the question, it would be easier for like, what do you like about being Mexican American? Because I can't say one thing without the other for me because I'm both. And like I very much know that I am both.
Yeah, and you're proud of being both, which is also key. Uh,
Yeah.
that's a really interesting answer because we obviously all have a lot of immigrant blood, we call it. We have no problem talking about that. Here in Argentina, people say we come from the boat. A lot of people come from Europe and have families
Yeah.
that came from Europe and immigrated here. And it's not a problem for us at all to talk about it. I think it's a little bit more charged in the States because of a lot of factors we're not going to discuss. But for us, for example, I am Italian, but I call myself Argentinian. And I'm Italian, I'm English, but I call myself Argentinian. And I think a lot of us don't have a problem with that. So it's very interesting and fascinating to hear another story and another culture talking about how they perceive or identify themselves, because it tells a lot about the history of the country. And
Yeah.
it's a very charged question. I agree. It's very charged. And it's interesting to discuss it with different people and different stories. So thank you for answering. And I have two more questions, Mark. How is it in terms of friendship in New York? Because I feel like it could be quite hard to foster and to have real friendships or long-term friendships in a city that is so volatile, where people come and go, where people perhaps, as myself, go for a work experience and then they leave. How do you find finding true friends in New York after being there for so long?
Yeah, no, I think you touched on it already by saying, it's not an easy city to live in. It's also I don't know another word for it, it's a simpler word, a transient city, meaning people spend 2, 3 years here and then they do something else, or they come for university and they do something else. They get one good job. So it's a city that sees people come and go a lot. And a lot of my friends that I made have come and gone and or spent here their 20s, and I'm in my 30s now. I'm married, or then they got married and then they moved because their husband worked somewhere else or because they wanted a home. And it's not possible to buy a home in the city unless you make your multi-billion dollar. I don't you can't even make $1 million because that's not enough here. Like you have to make more than that to like buy a home, which is wild, right? But yeah, it's been, I think you have to, in New York, you kind of have to kind of keep your close circle and you have to be very intentional about who you hang out with. But the plus side of that is that you can find an interest, and because we're in like the melting pot of the world, there's going to be another person. And that's the great thing. Like New York has so many meetups or clubs for like people who like watches, people who have Pomeranians. Like I'm part of a club that of other dog parents who have Pomeranians, and we meet once a month in the park, and there's 60, 50 Pomeranians like that come all over, and everyone just comes and hangs out. And that's how I've made some friends. So I guess, when I don't have like the friends that I went to school with, or that I've known for years. I think I have very few actually now. Every friend that I have now is someone that I've worked with, or someone that I've met through my husband because um I don't have any family here. I don't have very many friends for university, only one or two, but we're not very close, but even though they live in the area. So everybody is new. So I think 10 years ago, those were not the same friends that I have now. So, but that's okay. I think it's nice to know that you can still make friends as an adult. Um, but
Yeah,
yeah, there's a lot of opportunity here for sure. But I think you have to seek it out because just as much as it's a busy city, it can also be very lonely because you can feel overwhelmed by like there's so many people, like where do I start? Or like I'm so little, like how do you even stand out?
true.
But I like to go and talk to people like if at the bar, like I'll make conversation with someone, um, or we go to karaoke, or like if you go to trivia night or something, like there's always gonna be regulars. And I think that's actually important. That's how I've made friends. Pick a bar or a restaurant and go a lot. And then you get to know the people who work there. And then you get to know other people who also go a lot. So actually, now that I think about it, there's a couple of restaurants where like that's how we made friends like with them. It's just we just kept going to the same place. And then who keeps going too. And you're like, okay, we clearly have something in common. We both like wine because we're at this wine bar once a week. So you kind of make
Yeah,
friends that way.
it sounds good. It sounds like a good strategy. So,
Yeah.
I guess final question for me at least is about happiness. I think happiness and how we find it changes a lot from decade or day to day to me. But what makes you happy right now? How are you finding happiness? Because we all know it's in small moments, but what makes you happy now? That's my last question.
Yeah. I think now that I've gotten older, have found happiness in just taking care of myself and like putting myself first. I think in my 20s it was like a hustle. You keep going, working, doing everything you can. And I think as in my 30s, I've now kind of realized that if I'm not okay, no one else will be okay. So I have to really like the moments for me are just as important as what I give to work, as what I give to other things. So I really kind of enjoy that, and that makes me happy to be able to be like I can take care of myself. I can feed myself great food. I can take care of my body. I can, get enough rest. I can treat myself to a massage, get my nails done. Just anything that's 100% for me makes me proud that I can do that, right? Because I'm doing it for myself. So that makes me happy. Of course, like my dog is like my world, so he's a big part of my happiness. And I'm married now, so when my husband is, you know, remembers to do the dishes and clean the house, I'm also very happy.
Yeah, that's a good one. Small things,
Yeah,
small wins, small wins.
yeah.
So I guess I'm going to ask the guys if they have any questions for you, and then we will let you relax and take care of yourself after a long
Thanks.
day of working. Guys, any questions for Marilyn? They have a lot to think about, so don't be scared if they don't. Perfect. No, really, do you have any questions, Barbie?
No, well, living, your,
The area.
eh,
I don't know if you can hear them very well,
I
so I'm
couldn't.
going to repeat. He's asking where exactly or which area of Manhattan you live in.
Oh, if you're familiar with Manhattan, I live in Midtown, all the way west, right? So I'm on the part of the island where if you look out, there's the water and New Jersey, but we're on the island. So
Okay,
yeah, the west area. Kind
Avenue,
of Times Square is about a 10-minute walk from me if you're walking. So kind of most people know where Times Square is.
Good Avenue, that he likes to walk.
the dog.
Oh,
He's asking, what's your favorite avenue or street to walk your dog?
Oh, because I live right by the water. There's actually a park right along the water, right next to me. So we prefer to walk him there because there's not so many tourists and not a lot of people. And we get the nice breeze of the water, and there's the park. So it's nice for him. There's a really big dog park there too that they have. So yeah.
And I guess it's a little bit more open, because I remember when living in New York, for me, it was very overwhelming to walk in the middle of so many buildings all the time. It was very tiring. I know you're used to it, but for me, it was extremely tiring. I was always very, very overwhelmed at the end of the day, compared to London, that is much lower in terms of how high the buildings are, unless you live
Yeah.
in, nobody lives in the city. So I remember going to the riverside because I felt it was a little bit more open.
Yeah. Yeah, I definitely do. I'm very grateful. I've lived in the same apartment for 10 years now. So I've always lived here since I moved. And I'm grateful now looking back. I think I wouldn't have picked this location when I was 20, but I got a very good deal when I moved here to this place. But now that I've gotten older, I'm like, oh, thank God I have like the pier right here. I'm like 2 seconds from the pier. The water is right there. Like I kind of feel like it's a little escape, and I can pretend I'm not like so in the city, because you're right. Even like even the weather feels worse because if it's hot in the city and then you're between buildings, you have no air. And I at least get some air here.
The heat
I
in New
get to
York
enjoy that.
is extreme. I
Yeah,
was, I don't remember being so hot apart from our city right here, Rosario. Rosario
yeah.
is extreme. The humidity is like 100% all the time. We're supposed to be in winter and it's extremely hot now. We are waiting. We are really waiting for the winter. We hate the heat. We're so done. We are all shiny and it's so humid. It's disgusting. Any other questions?
And the routine of the hour actually start working. Or
Finishing. They're asking about your schedule. When do you start work and when you finish work, typically or
Yeah.
generally?
It's so because I do PR, it's a little bit of a flexible schedule. I'd say mostly it's about 10 to about 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock, depending on what we're doing. And also depending on the season. There's some like summer is kind of slow for us, so we'll probably be working a little less hours just because everyone is traveling. So there's a little less activations for us. But we also do events for brands. So those days I have to then work almost a full day, right? Because it's like I am there from 7 a.m. I set up everything, and then the client comes, and then we have the event, and then you have to take them to dinner and you have to do drinks. I have to do a lot of social things for my job. So even though I'm off at 6, I could still have to take someone to dinner or meet someone for a drink because I have to do it for work. So I think it changes a bit depending on if I have a client visiting or if I'm having a meal with a journalist for whatever reason.
Oh, it's a cool job, but it's also very tiring, and I know that.
Yeah,
Socializing
yeah.
is not easy. It's not easy,
Socializing for work is not easy, but yeah,
but you
it's
have
fine.
to. Yeah,
You have to do it.
yeah.
Yeah.
Guys, anything else? You're, vamos, Teresa. Bueno, más, te despedimos en español.
Ok, bueno, como tú quieras.
Dale, ahí está. Cambia la personalidad, ¿eh? Cuando uno habla en otro idioma parece
Sí,
distinto.
hasta la voz, hasta la voz te cambia todo.
Sí, te cambia un montón la voz cuando hablas en español.
Sí,
¿No?
¿verdad?
Es re fuerte.
Como está más alta mi voz, ¿no? Que en English I feel like I talk here and in Spanish I'm here.
Es otro tono. Es otro tono, qué fuerte.
Sí.
Bueno, muchas gracias por hacer esto y tenemos un grupo también con otros alumnos en donde hay language exchange. So if you want to practice Spanish at all, if you think you need it, you can go on this group and they propose different times to do short Zoom sessions and you speak a little bit of Spanish, a little bit of English. So if you have the time, which you probably don't have, you could do that if you were interested to get it.
Yeah, sounds good. Te dejo saber,
Bueno,
de
perfecto.
seguro.
Bueno, Marta, después hablamos. Después hablamos.
Ok,
Por
gracias,
conectar.
mucho gusto a todos y gracias por escuchar mi vida no tan mental interesante, lo que tuve que decir.
Un beso gigante a vos, a tu husband y a tu son.
Yeah. Cuídate, nos hablamos pronto.
Beso,
Chao.
chao.